What if ritual wasn't superstition, but spiritual technology? In late antiquity, Neoplatonists like Iamblichus taught the soul cannot return to the divine through philosophy alone. It must be participated in with sacred symbols, statues, names, incense, cosmic correspondence, things that align with the structure of reality itself. This was called theurgy, or God work. Not magic, not metaphor, but ritual union with the divine. And this worldview did not emerge, it wasn't random or in isolation. It echoes the temple rituals of ancient Egypt. The logic of divine presence in consecrated statues and later profoundly influences this Christian mysticism. From the angelic hierarchies to the sacramental theology, theurgy plays a part. Tonight, on Chasing the Past, we're going to explore theology not on an occult level or spectacle, but as a sacred technology, one of Ascent, and one of the ritualistic paths back to the One. Let's begin. What is up, guys? Welcome back. This one is, it's out there. I'll give it that. It is definitely out there. Now, I wanted to do this one. I know we were doing the Kabbalah. We were going through the Essential Kabbalah book, and we're going through those. But as I'm reading that one, I then come across the Y files. It's not new, but some of you have commented, and you mentioned the Y files. I've watched the Y files for a long time, and they started doing a podcast. And let me pause here. I want to make sure. I'm pretty sure it's the guy who is doing the Templar, right? And he's the Grandmaster Templar, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, Timothy Hogan. I doubted myself, but I was correct. It's Tim Hogan. That episode I've seen him do a lot. But when he did it with AJ, I was like, dude, I go, some of this revolves around an episode I'm making on theurgy, right? Like things having some type of divine resonance or they house something that's divine. And he's talking about Egypt and all these different things. If you haven't checked it out, it is interesting and fascinating. And I'm not trying to put like a 100% pin, on this guy, but fascinating nonetheless. So I was building this episode, and I wasn't going to do it for a while, but bear with it, struggle with it. I am. Because if it's true, it kind of shatters the idea that this is all that it is, right? The physical world, that's it. And I kind of like it. I kind of do. And so we're just going to do a quick little thing on theurgy. And I don't know if I can get this out on time, but it's been a little bogged down this weekend. But I wanted to get you something. And I think this does tie into a little bit of later Kabbalah traditions. It ties into the fascination of Egypt, which if you even look at Egyptian culture and the traditions and rituals, like, it's worth going to look at and study. So we're going to go through theurgy. And so this is the Greek word theurgica, which means God work. So it's a spiritual practice. And it says, from what I could tell, it says just developed in late antiquity. Now, it's popular by the Neoplatonist, right? Like, I'm pretty sure it's Iamblichus, but the Renaissance period, they really bring it out. So this practice is rituals designed to unite the human soul with the divine. And in this practice, you need the mind to rise towards this the divine understanding or divinity itself. So the cool part is, I think this is where we sometimes get lost, kind of in modern day too, where science can solve all of our problems. It has all the answers. Well, that should be on a t-shirt. Well, I don't know, because there's things that if you look at the way that we operate in the world, we might miss some things, right? A lot of what we view in the world is about the perception, right? Perspective on how we look at stuff. And if you're looking at it just from this scientific angle, you're going to miss some of the underlying spiritual stuff. In string theory, for example, you might be able to measure dimensions, right? You might be able to measure and do the math, but you're not going to be able to experience it. You're not going to be able to put it in your hands. You're not going to be able to make words from it, especially if there's a place where there aren't any words. It's undefinable. And this kind of reminded me of this episode of Theurgy. And essentially, theurgy is this devotional, mystic idea of using symbolic ritual to spiritually engineer a way to become one with the divine. And everyone's heard, sacred geometry is a big one, right? The solar and the lunar alignments, or the symbology between this, anything. I'm having a tough time. I laugh not because this is like funny. I laugh because we kind of take it for granted, right? We just assume like, oh yeah, the sun's gonna be there every day, or like the stars are gonna be there all the time, and it's like, okay. To them it was like the symbol of, these patterns, these things that we recognize link us to the divine. And they serve almost as kind of like a bridge, right? Like, between the realms we cannot see and the ones that the material that we live in, we can bridge that gap. And we can do that through ritual. We can do it through practices, and let's say we do this ritual, right? We take this ritual and we try to put it in something like a vessel, right? And it reminds me of the episode I did about the statues, these diorite statues, both in Egypt and Mesopotamia. And it just got me thinking, like, if this is true, right? Well, it also kind of reminds me of like the iconic ghost shows where they're like the Annabelle doll, right? It's possessed. It's got something inside of it. And, if this is a practice and this is something that can be done, then maybe, right? And if it's something you don't understand, and it's something that maybe it's so, and again, there might be a blend of divine and not so divine, right? Maybe something does come into the material that has an ulterior motive. And then I started going, oh my. The brain started going, and I'm like, you know what? I did some notes on something else. Apparently they did not save. So I had this theurgical idea, and I wanted to kind of do it. So, here we go. I have to cough. Theurgists believed gods could inhabit statues temporarily through ritual, thank you, similar to Egyptian ideas and these Mesopotamian divine idol practices. So instead of these vessels just being like, false idols, quote unquote, if you can see those, they were literal vessels for presence. And this presence was maybe, again, it could be both. It could be a divine presence, or it could be something that is a needed I don't even know how to word it. I don't want to say the word evil, because it's kind of like, the more I learn about these, it's kind of less black and white and more blended, right? Kind of reminds me of Job, too. Again, 2 separate stories in that book. But these objects then become ceremonially and inherently magical. So this power comes from of course, the inhabitant of these vessels that become presents. But then with that becomes this resonance of divine reality, which also kind of negates science in a specific and yet particular way. So there's something in me wants to unite both really bad. Like I really want both of them to kind of meet in the middle and seek out the unseekable. Maybe we as human beings can merge both in a unique and odd way. Not to be above someone else, not to use it in a negative way, but there are practices. You know, we all know about the crystals, right? Like, you know, where it's like, oh, let me just wave the crystal in front of you, right? Maybe that's one piece of something that could be potentially a bringer of the divine. So then you have, of course, through all the ancient texts, you have, you know, incense and specific herbs and names that you use that are specific in the right specific way. And then you do these chants. Maybe you do some hymns. Maybe you sing the right note, hit the right frequency, right? Frequency is a big one. That'd be a fun episode to do. But because it's almost like this music or this sound was the direct connection of frequency to connect you to yourself and to this cosmic soul, right? It hits the right note. That note then generates the response. That response then resonates with, boom, the divine. And part of me, like, you understand, like, if you go to, like, everyone knows that feeling when you go to a concert or you go to some live event and you're like, whoa, that just hit me in a different way. Like, I'm having this experience, right? That music does that. So it's not such a far stretch for me to think that music wasn't the same feeling or vibe for them. And so the whole, like, why is this important? Why do you need these artifacts? Why do you need... To me, it was pretty clear that even if you're, let's say, in a science-minded person, right, the consensus is that we are this shadow of something that's happening beyond us in a different dimension. So if you can take what's happening up there, put it into the material world, you can put it in a vessel, right? Well, now you're bringing the divine, something above yourself, into this material world, and that kind of changes this. It reorients you, and you almost remember what this divine world is. And to me, I just did a very simple breakdown, right? Like, what is the goal? What are you trying to do? So the artifact is the vessel. Ritual then becomes the practice you do to bring this divine presence into the vessel, this artifact. That then gives you this illumination of the soul. And then from that and from that knowledge, the thing that you learned from this practice, you then can remember, thus ascend to where you're at currently or have been, or a place where time has no relevance. And it brings apart this mystical union. Excuse me. right during the punch, right? It sneeze all over my keyboard. So for someone who's practicing theurgy, right, it's a literal mystical union of the divine and the material. And so I had GPT do this summary, and it was kind of like the divine connection between this spiritual practice gives way to this cosmic ritualist system, which then Neoplatonists later build. And then this method becomes one for elevating the soul. And so this sacred technology, then by utilizing these symbols and these artifacts, they become these ritualistic objects. And they become charged almost with cosmic correspondence. And then that helps the human being facilitate these divine connections. And I go, whoa, like immediately, if you look all over the ancient texts, you look all over ancient practices, ancient religious beliefs, right? This is there, right? There's a weird connection to bringing the divine down to earth, connecting with it, right? We all have priests, we all have, people that are in charge of these sacred places to bring the divine down into these vessels, or into objects, or into spaces, or into the material world, even on a very supernatural, I mentioned the ghost show, even on a very supernatural, way. And this is just off the top of my head here, but maybe that is why, because let's say you don't understand something. So if you don't understand something and you do it, right, maybe you're bringing something from another place that should not be here, right? And it's negative. It's very negative. To me, that would relate to this modern Western idea of like a demon, right? Something that is demonic or negative, right? And maybe it's because you didn't know the right steps. You weren't doing it in the right way. You weren't practicing proper theurgy, and then thus you bring something you don't know into a world that you think you know, but we have no idea of how most of the stuff operates. So you're bringing the unknown, or I guess the unknowable, into the unknown, and you're going like, please, like, I hope this works, right? There might be some mess ups in there, just off the top of my head. Yeah, you might have some issues going on. And so I just found this connection really unique with the Neoplatonists, because they're very involved in like Greek New Testament, and then the Egyptians. And, it's not, they were very, like, they weren't broad about it. I was about to say broad. Jeez. Excuse me. And so most of these Platonists, right, they even said that like Egyptian religious practice brought this into, the modern day. And so it might be filtered through Greek philosophy, but all of them said that philosophy alone cannot describe this. It can't, through it you can kind of understand the mind maybe, but you can't, it's hard to describe it without practice. And anyway, Iamblichus, he defined late antiquity philosophy by linking metaphysics to religious ritual through the practice of theurgy. So his thought became central to later pagan and then Christian mystic traditions. And he's in the CEs, right? It's like 245 to 325 CE. So he's in that time period of like Neoplatonism. And again, like Egyptian ritual was already this theourgia in Greek, right? This practice they would do, the things they would try to bring would already be this God work. And, they would do these rites to awaken the god in the statue. They would purify the priest as a vessel, which isn't uncommon in other ancient Near East traditions. They would do specific gestures, incense. They would do chants, right? Something that was interesting too is that they're hieroglyphs, right? These were these divine symbols. And it wasn't just a writing system, it was divine symbology itself, which also seems very similar to what we're learning in Kabbalah and in the Hebrew language, right? It wasn't just language, it was the writing of divinity. And that divinity gave way to the stars, God, elements, and other cosmic correspondence. So to this Egyptian priest, it was like the ritual became the way that they would maintain order, right? So that would be, let me is it Ma'at? I'm pretty sure. I'll put it on the screen if I'm wrong, but this cosmic order was Ma'at, right? These statues then become things the gods would inhabit, right? This would become their physical body. They would then be in these vessels. And so these offerings then became the incense and the smoke, right? They were rising, they lift, they go to the divine. And that kind of became the theurgic function of ritual. And again, they explicitly claim that Egyptian wisdom is responsible for this source, that ritual was not superstition. Ritual works because the gods respond to these symbols, right? And these symbols, they are embedded in the cosmos. And the Egyptians then preserved this knowledge from ancient times. And then it goes, oh my God, like that's so Tim Hogan on the Y Files. He's describing all of these things and why they're important. And so the general idea is that philosophy alone cannot save your soul, right? The soul, you can kind of understand the mind through it, but like this ritual can definitely bind you to the divine. And thus, Platonists revered Egyptians as like the home, right? These divine mysteries then become the place where they're like, we could do something with that now that we have this philosophy behind us. And so the Egyptian rituals usually go with purification, which is very similar to like the Hebrew priests, right? Or even just regular Judaism in itself, right? You have to wash yourself of, this sin, this nasty stuff. So you have to get in this bath, right? And then maybe the incense, you walk through the incense, right? Then you open up the sanctuary, right? You awaken this deity, God in this statue or this item. You offer food, you offer, light, right? So you have these windows where like they shine through in Egypt and they hit this temple just right. And then through incense in the room, right? Maybe you start to hit this tone, this frequency. You start to say these sacred names and these hymns. And then you close the ritual with a blessing, and then you seal it off until the next time. And some of these theurgical practices, they're very close to Egypt. Like Egyptian has this opening of the mouth, right, which is this activation of statues. You have the Heka, which is these sacred powers, right? So in theurgy, it's the logoi, which is these, you say the right things. You say these divine words to bring upon these sacred powers. And then you have this Egyptian connection to this cosmic symmetry of the heavens, right? And that later becomes this Neoplatonic hierarchy of being that we've talked about in other episodes. And so this theurgy and Neoplatonic thought then becomes a philosophical, it's a reinterpretation almost of these old ways of the Egyptian priest, the priestly class. And the whole reason is like I remember the pyramids or any of these really wicked buildings. You're like, why would they go to so much effort? Well, you would if the god dwells in this place. If the gods choose this item, they choose this, they choose to be here because of this ritual. Well, then these vessels become then essentially ensouled, like the soul is locked in through these rituals. And so then it's no longer, like a symbolic idea, right? They're in there. Like this is a very real, literal divine presence in here that we can bring down to us, and we can learn from, we can talk to, we can interact with. And like I said, it reminds me of like they're finding a lot of Jewish talismans, right? And it kind of makes me go, why would you make a talisman? Why would you make an object? Why would you try to put the divine in these things or keep them here if you didn't believe it? Like the jinn, right? Like the genie, classic, like rub the rub the lamp and the genie comes out, right? That reminds me of like theurgy, right? And the cool things I found were it wasn't just like these talismans, it was like figurines, right? Stones, right? Somehow the incense, right? They bound to it, right? And then the light that hits it just right. There's something with light. And that's a whole video in itself, how light pertains to the divine. And so those are just straight up temple practices. And again, we talked kind of about it a little bit, but the theurgist speaks of, ascension. That's very key, right? You want to ascend to this divine place. And, we kind of walked through this in an earlier video about like how the planetary spheres are kind of incorporated into that. And so it's bringing something that is so far beyond you into the material that you can maybe understand it. And so then it becomes, you can understand it from a realm that's intelligible, right? You can't understand it otherwise. And the whole goal is to become one with the one, right? The divine, the all, the Ein Sof in Kabbalah, which I thought was super interesting and a good connection point to move through. But so from the Neoplatonists, right, these early Christian thinkers then formed this idea, right? A good example is the Eucharist, right? I remember, side note, it's a funny personal, sometimes you have to experience some of these, right? We sometimes get lost in how we do practices, but I remember going with my buddy to some type of mass, and they did the whole incense, and they were moving this little chain thing, right? You could see the smoke coming out, and then they brought this little vessel, and they put it on this fancy little podium thing, and they were like doing a Latin prayer or something, and we did it, and I'm like, what is going on? I thought we were just here to pray. And they turned it, and they opened it, and I looked, and I just started staring at this Eucharist, and I go, is that a graham cracker? Like, right in the middle of this church, they're like, like, quiet down. I'm like, it just looked like a big cracker, right? And I was like, okay, so the Eucharist has this weird property where by doing this ritual, right, you're bringing like grace into the sanctum of the church, right? Like Jesus is here now in this cracker, and that's how this works. And I'm like, okay, it's a little too far for me at the time, but I mean, it doesn't sound too far-fetched in the idea of, theurgical practice. And, same with like the body of Christ and my blood spilt for you, right? The blood and the bread and the wine, I guess in this case, become the body and the blood of Jesus, right? You're bringing this divine thing into the material world, which isn't super far-fetched upon researching this. And so then in this area, this space that's open for it, that becomes the area where the divine presence can now reside. And you can talk to it, you can tap into it, you can be a part of it, right? And as a young, dumb kid, I was like, this is kind of dumb, right? Like, God, you can talk to him all the time, right? But now I kind of get this practice. So it's something that's super ancient that's still brought into modern day practice that I did not understand until I hit this, area of curiosity in my brain. And now I'm like, oh, booyah, like I get it. And so I wanted to include this, but like, Origin uses the phrase divine participation is met through symbols. And I'm like, whoa, okay, so this is a very pure theology. And in many traditions, right, especially in like the Christian mysticism, Christian Western idea, right, we get lost in like the words a little bit. So like theurgy, you're like, it's an occult practice. And you were like, excuse me, angels act as intermediaries, right? They communicate to God, right? isn't that the same thing where you like have a, you talk to this specific angel and then you get to get this message back to God in a way? And it's true, right? This structure becomes angels are the intermediaries. Archangels are this higher cosmic intelligence or intelligences because they have specific archangels, right? And then this Holy Spirit is the one that communicates back up and down, which reminds us of most of this Kabbalah literature we've been going through. And, it doesn't sound so crazy when you go through it this way, because then you say the right names, you use these names for power, and then they become these specific syllables you use, right? So later on, you get like the Lord's Prayer or Jesus' Prayer, right? You use the Hebrew name, Kabbalah, right? Maybe there's some Coptic in there, which is both Greek and Egypt, right? They have Coptic, and then the Gnostics have their own. So this chanting transforms the soul, right? Is like straight out of the ancient playbook. It is not new. It's not like it's not something that is so weird and foreign at the time. Right? This is just common. And something I found interesting was the idea of these early Christian mystics and what they described, right? And so for them, these practices then awoke the subtle spiritual body, right? This vehicle of the soul. And that is, the body of glory, the robe of light, inner illumination, right? Maybe the shining faces of Moses, and this transfiguration we talked about of Christ, right? It's the exact same spiritual, method and anthropology that is used throughout all of ancient history. And the same thing with monasticism, right? There's a lot here, but, you do the same chant, right? There's certain hours that you go to it. There, you have to be pure before you do this ritual. And silence. Silence is a good form of purification. Even now, I find it hard for myself at certain periods of my life to just be quiet. Like that, right? To silence the mind, right? It's very Eastern. And I'm like, whoa. So then I'm like, okay, what do these symbols have to work on? What's the big deal? And they become these gateways. So these practices develop you in your mind, in this physical body with the divine. And they communicate up and down, right? As above, so below, like we talked about already. And they become a gateway almost, right? You have access to this divine. You're a piece of the divine. But through this specific practice, this specific method, you can become one with the divine here in the material. And that kind of hit me a little different because I'm like, whoa, dude. It also was the same thing with it reminds me of the, telepathy tapes or any of these other things where, they're doing this crazy stuff. And it's like, yeah, all of them have one thing to say about it. You can do it. I can do it. No one's super special, right? We all have access to it. We just have to get away from this egotistical mindset of diving into being right all the time. Maybe there's something we miss. Maybe it's something that I wouldn't say too dumb to recognize. I would just say too ignorant to realize. And the whole point is theosis, which is to merge the soul with the divine back to its source again, where it comes from. And it's so funny because I found the word verbatim, which is the Neoplatonic goal. And that's the word you get. And I'm like, what? Anyway, I thought it was interesting. So I had these, of course, loaded up. And anytime Tim Hogan's on, I really watch it because I'll conclude with this. I hope it's true because it would be the greatest Indiana Jones story for all of us. Right? We would be able to participate in the greatest movies that, like, I watch them all the time. Not because of the character, not because of the action, not because of this or that. It's because it's that mystery, right? The thing that is undiscovered. And then you discover it, and it's way greater than you ever imagined. And, like, this theurgical practice, theurgy itself, is that practice. And so I'm going through all these pictures and all this stuff about ancient Egypt. And I'm like, I wonder if they believed these things would do something. They were communicating with something. You could make a vessel and then ensoul this God in the vessel. And it gave me a whole different outlook on the entire thing. And I'm like, this is amazing. Now, would I do it? Would I have a shrine in here? Probably not. I mean, this is a channel about complete authenticity, and I'm like, I don't think I'd be that devoted to it. But it would be really cool to learn from someone or to witness it and to see it and go, holy, what? And like that would be something I would do. But the whole point is that this practice makes us ask a specific question. Like, what if the way that we operate and the way that we move through the world, what if the way that we see the world, what if we interact with the world in a specific way makes the world a ritual space, right? We are bringing the divine here if we choose to do so. And then it means if, the symbols, if they're real, right? If life itself, if matter itself carries this divinity, like what if we can resonate with it, right? What if we can talk to it, right? We can say the things that need to be said, and we can bring it to the material, right? So what if superstition and ritual isn't just like a fancy way to like do a good religious service? What if you're doing it to align with the divine? Like, what? That would make sense for all the crazy architecture in the ancient past. All the, like, why would you go to this work to do these things? Because you're aligning yourself with divinity. So it means anything above the material. So you would use the material in a way that brings the divine down to you. Yeah, that'd probably make me do a lot of work to get it just right. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting topic. I thought we should at least bring that up. Next week, we're going to go through the Kabbalah some more. We're going to go through some of this. We're going to go deeper into it. But I thought maybe a middle point would be this theurgical practice and kind of getting an understanding of it so we could then move forward. And maybe some of these ideas and rituals and practices wouldn't seem so crazy. They would seem rational. I think that's a good way to end it. Anyway, thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of you guys. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for being here. I wish I could meet all you guys. Like, you've been so great, so kind, so compassionate, so loving, and I couldn't be more grateful. And every time I laugh, every time I smile, every time something good comes out of me in this, vibe, this feeling, right? It just reminds me of you. And I just want to thank you for your kindness. Thank you, guys. I'll see you next week.